Hey guys, tonight we're stepping barefoot into a place where shadows flicker like spirits, and silence is so thick it presses against your skull. You're about to enter an Irish monastic library, not as a tourist, but as a full-blown initiate. The kind who's handed a rough woolen robe, told to forget your name, and invited to spend the rest of your life copying Latin you barely understand. The air smells like smoke, wet stone, and sheep fat. Somewhere nearby, rain taps against slate, soft and steady. You're hungry, slightly damp, and unsure whether the figure watching from the far end of the cloister is alive, or just another carved saint. You probably won't survive this. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is for you. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You arrive just before dawn, cloaked in fog and nerves. No one greets you with open arms. Instead, an older monk nods once, mutters something in Latin, and shoves a small bundle of cloth at your chest. It's a robe. Brown, scratchy, and heavier than it looks. It smells faintly of mould and ashes. You're not sure if it's supposed to comfort you or break you in. The monastery is carved into the side of a wind-battered hill, hunched like it's hiding from the weather. Stone walls rise around you, weathered and dripping. There are no doors where you expect doors to be, just narrow archways that look like oversized mouse holes. You duck through one and find yourself in a cloister, an open rectangle surrounded by covered walkways. Everything echoes here, your breath, your steps, your heartbeat. Inside, the silence is complete, not serene, not peaceful, heavy. You step carefully, almost ashamed of the sound your feet make. Somewhere above, a bell tower looms like a watchful crow. You'll learn to hate that bell. Not today, but soon. There are rules, and you break two before breakfast. First, you whisper hello to the monk who gave you the robe. He pauses mid-step and sighs. That earns you 2 days of stone polishing. Second, you walk into the chapel with your hood down. Brother Owen catches you, points silently to the ceiling, then to your head. You don't understand. He makes you do laps around the cloister until your knees beg for mercy. You haven't even seen the scriptorium yet. At the morning service, you're wedged into a narrow wooden stall next to Brother Padraig, who smells like ink and old onions. He doesn't look at you, or breathe loud, or shift in his seat. You try to match his stillness and fail almost instantly. Your foot cramps, your back spasms, your brain runs a marathon of regrets. The Gregorian chant begins and fills the stone with mournful beauty. You try to sing but falter on the Latin, and the monk beside you coughs meaningfully. Historians still argue whether these monasteries were sanctuaries or prisons. To you, it's clearly both. Later, you're shown your sleeping cell. It's smaller than a pantry, and the straw mattress looks like a nest built by someone with arthritis and no sense of comfort. There's a small wooden cross above the bed, and a crack in the wall where wind whistles in. You sit on the mattress. It puffs a small cloud of dust and insect legs into your face. You lie back and watch the ceiling sway. Still, there's something hauntingly beautiful about this place. The walls are thick with time. The corridors twist like secrets. Candles flicker in iron sconces, casting gold shadows on frescoes so old, their saints look surprised you're still looking at them. You eat dinner, that's what you want to call a lukewarm bowl of barley mush and 3 boiled weeds. You're not allowed to speak. If you drop your spoon, no one helps you. If you make a face, someone writes it down. You are part of the monastery now, but you are not important. The abbey was probably founded in the 6th or 7th century. The exact years debated, but the story goes that St. Aed built it after seeing a flaming hand in the sky. Could have been divine revelation, could have been a migraine. Either way, he built it here, on a jagged outcrop between 2 rivers, and it has endured plagues, Viking raids, and more than a few heresy trials. You sleep terribly your first night. The straw mattress squeaks like it's alive. Your robe itches. Something skitters in the dark. You think it's a mouse. You hope it's a mouse. In the morning, a bell clangs before the sun even thinks about rising. You jerk upright and hit your head on the low ceiling. Welcome to monastic life. Brother Séamus, who smiles like a thundercloud, hands you a candle and leads you down a corridor that smells like damp stone and old tallow. You're taken to the library, but not the real one. This is the outer chamber where novices sit and copy psalms over and over again. You see the real library once from a distance through a cracked door. A row of chained books glints in the torchlight, their spines curved with age. You feel something stir, maybe awe, maybe dread. You pick up your first quill. It's trimmed from a goose feather and still smells faintly like bird. Your ink is thick, black, and made from fermented oak galls and rust. It stains instantly. The vellum you're given has a faint trace of hair. It's real calf skin, scraped and stretched until it cries. You're told to begin. The silence is absolute. You're 5 words in when your fingers cramp. Not a good start. The ink blobs slightly on the first D. Deus, of course, it's always Deus. And Brother Séamus's shadow shifts behind you like a hawk noticing a wounded rabbit. You glance up. He doesn't say anything, just raises an eyebrow. You blot the excess with a piece of sheep's wool, pretend you meant to do that, and try again. By your 10th line, your back aches. The bench was designed by someone who truly believed comfort was a sin. Your feet tingle. The chill in the air has crept up from the floor, crawled into your robe, and now settles under your skin like mildew, and you are sweating somehow. This is where you live now. Monastic discipline isn't a mild suggestion. It's a bodily condition. You're not just copying scripture, you're supposed to embody it. That means silence unless spoken to, eyes down unless praying, and zero indulgence in anything that might be considered luxurious. And yes, warmth, rest, and dry socks count as luxury. They're not trying to make you suffer. They just think it's good for your soul, so you don't complain when your hands shake from cold, or when your stomach growls audibly in the midday stillness, or when you're told that bathing consists of standing in a freezing stream for exactly 4 Hail Marys, then scrubbing your underarms with coarse sand and horsehair. And if you catch a chill, more penance. Hair shirts are exactly what they sound like. Undershirts made from rough animal hair, designed to make you itch and squirm and, ideally, think about your sins. You're not required to wear one all the time, but plenty of monks do. Voluntarily. Because apparently inner peace lives somewhere just past deep discomfort. You put one on once just to try, lasted 20 minutes, thought you were being stabbed by dry grass demons. Historians still argue whether such practices were widespread or more localized, possibly exaggerated by later writers. But one thing is certain, pain and piety were best friends in this world. And speaking of pain, your new sandals are wooden, thin, badly cut and tied with strips of stiff leather. You can actually feel each pebble underfoot. The paths between buildings are rough gravel, and they always slope slightly uphill regardless of direction. You wonder if that's intentional. Spiritual metaphor via landscape design. Your daily routine includes 6 church services, 2 work sessions, 1 barely edible meal, and roughly 45 minutes of what they call contemplative solitude, which is just monk speak for sit on a stool and try not to die of boredom. The scriptorium isn't heated. No part of the monastery is really. But this room feels like a dare. It's also where time slows. You sit under guttering candles hunched at low desks, copying line after line, until your hand becomes a creature with its own agenda. You're allowed to warm your fingers slightly over the candle any longer, and Brother Séamus taps you on the knuckles with his favourite stick. It has a name. It's called mercy. The irony is not lost on anyone. Every so often someone coughs. The sound echoes like thunder. If it happens more than twice in an hour, the whole room is sent outside for disciplinary pacing. You learn quickly not to cough. Quirky detail. There's a strange little ritual the monks do with their inkstones. Before writing, they swirl the ink 3 times clockwise, then once counterclockwise, then whisper something under their breath. You ask Brother Padrig about it during your evening floor scrubbing duty. He shrugs and says, "Keeps the devil from your margins." You're not sure if he's joking. One of the older monks, Brother Colum, has the steadiest hand in the whole scriptorium. His pages are perfect, his margins aligned like marching soldiers. He hasn't spoken in 15 years. They say he once caught a vision of St. Brigid hovering over his inkpot and took a vow of silence to honour her. Or maybe he just got tired of everyone's nonsense. Either way, you admire him. He never shivers. You, meanwhile, are trying not to die from exposure and boredom. Your lips are cracked. Your wrists hurt. Your thighs have gone numb from sitting so long, and you haven't seen a woman in 3 weeks, not even in the illuminations. except for one curly-haired Eve in a marginal scene who seems suspiciously modern-looking. You wonder which monk snuck her in. The food situation doesn't help. Breakfast, if it exists, is watery broth and maybe a chunk of old bread. Lunch is always barley mush. Dinner doesn't happen unless it's Sunday, and even then it's just lunch again, but in a bigger bowl. If you want flavour, you're encouraged to think about heaven. Occasionally there's a fish, a grey, flaky slab served cold and silent. No talking at meals, just chewing. Soft chewing if you value your life. You've been here long enough to start dreaming in Latin phrases and ink splatters. Sometimes the bells ring in your dreams. Sometimes you wake up before they do, convinced you've missed something crucial, only to find it's still dark, still raining, still another 6 hours until Lord's. But you stay, because despite the pain and the freezing floors and the minor hallucinations, there's a rhythm to it. A brutal, beautiful kind of rhythm. Something about the scratch of quills and the flicker of candles and the absolute silence of a dozen minds focused on a single task. You begin to wonder if that's the point. By now, you've learned to breathe softly, step lightly, and think before you scratch your nose. Every movement is a potential disruption. Every sound, even a sigh, invites scrutiny. The monastery is built on silence, not polite quiet, not library quiet, but vow of silence quiet. And in this world, sound is scandal. You're not even supposed to clear your throat during Mass. Brother Finton did once 3 days ago, and he hasn't been seen since, probably sentenced to weeding the cemetery by moonlight or recopying numbers in the freezing cellar. Either way, message received. The rule, the actual rule, as in the rule of Saint Benedict, demands obedience, humility and silence, particularly silence. Not because monks were antisocial, but because speech leads to pride, pride leads to sin, and sin, well, that's how you end up getting reincarnated as a turnip, or something like that. So you hold your tongue, always, even when your back spasms, even when the ink spills, even when Brother Séamus trips on a cat and hurls his psalter across the room. He didn't speak either, just stared at the cat like he was memorising it for later punishment. You begin to feel how loud your thoughts are. The more you suppress your voice, the more your inner voice booms. It gets weirdly judgmental. It recites psalms at you when you get bored. It remembers every embarrassing moment you've ever lived. It once spent a full hour listing every type of tree you could name. You can't even write notes, at least not openly. One monk, young, nervy, name unknown, slipped you a tiny square of vellum during clean-up last week. On it, one word. Potatoes? No idea what it means, but you folded it into your robe pocket anyway, because even nonsense feels revolutionary here. Historians still argue whether the monks truly never spoke, or simply practiced selective silence, speaking only during confession or emergencies, or presumably if a fire started during morning prayer. Some monasteries had talking rooms. Not here. You've yet to hear anything above a mumble, and even that earned a glare from the abbot's assistant. Now, let's talk about punishment. Oh yes, because you will mess up. You'll miswrite a name, you'll nod off during matins, you'll look like you're daydreaming, even if you're just trying not to go cross-eyed from copying in principio erat verbum for the 89th time. And when you do, there are penances. Some are relatively gentle, fasting for example, or copying a particularly dense passage over again. But sometimes it's physical. A switch to the palm, a knuckle rap from Brother Séamus, a day of floor washing with vinegar and straw brushes. Your knees have never known so much stone, and sometimes it's creative. One monk was caught humming, and his punishment was to copy the entire Book of Lamentations using only red ink and a damaged quill. The ink bled through the page. The quill squeaked. It took him 14 days. He hasn't hummed since. You've already earned a scribe's fast. No speaking, no eating, and triple the copying quota, because you accidentally drew the letter R backward in the word spiritus. Just once. It still haunts you. A quirky note, a few monks, especially the older ones, actually speak, just not to humans. They mutter to their quills, whisper at their inkstones. One, Brother Tomas hums little prayers at his candle before lighting it. When you asked why, he smiled with only his eyes and mouthed, "It listens better than the abbot." You've begun to notice little details others miss, like how the abbot's robes have been mended with tiny crosses stitched in white thread. Penitential sewing, perhaps. or how every wooden bench in the scriptorium has one tiny notch carved in exactly the same spot, like a centuries-old fidget toy. Some scholars believe those notches were made intentionally, to help monks focus their minds while their bodies sat still. Others think monks just got really bored. Your own bench has 3 notches. You run your thumb over them whenever your neck cramps. It helps. On feast days, there is slightly more leniency. Still no talking, of course, but music. You listen to a few brave souls chant ancient hymns, harmonizing across the stone like ghostly choirs. The echo is a whole other instrument. You feel the notes settle into your ribs. You wonder what it would be like to sing back. You won't. Not because you're afraid of punishment, though you are, but because something about this place changes you. You begin to crave the silence. It's clean. It's orderly. It sharpens the edges of your perception until the sound of quill on vellum becomes almost melodic. And there are moments, fleeting, rare, when you understand. When the candle flickers just right. When your margin lines up so precisely it feels like divine geometry. When your mind empties and your hand just writes, and time folds in on itself like parchment. It doesn't last, but it's real. By now you move like smoke between cloisters, soft, slow, shaped by wind. You've stopped expecting eye contact. You've stopped expecting anything, really, which is probably for the best. The less you expect, the easier this place fits over you like a second scratchier skin. The cloister walk becomes your entire world. A narrow stone corridor circling the courtyard, arched and shadowed, always damp no matter the weather. The path is worn smooth by centuries of silent footsteps. Moss pushes through the cracks. The wind plays a lonely tune through the archways. Sometimes it sounds like whispering. You walk it at least 20 times a day, from your cell to the chapel, chapel to the scriptorium, scriptorium to the garden for brief, miserable breaks where you stand among cabbages and pretend the sun is warm. You memorize every creak of every flagstone. One near the west corner is slightly loose. It shifts underfoot with a faint click. You always step on it, just to feel something respond. In a place this still, even that counts as conversation. You start noticing things others seem to ignore, like the faint Latin graffiti carved into the cloister walls, mostly psalms, some names, and one memorable, non possum scribere amplius, scratched like a prayer for mercy. I can no longer write. Probably left by someone who snapped mid-scribing session. You feel that. One of the strangest marks is near the North Passage, a carving of a tiny fish wearing a crown. It's been partially scrubbed away, but it's there. Maybe an inside joke from centuries ago. Maybe a warning? Historians still debate what some of these symbols mean. Early Christian iconography, monastic satire, boredom-induced doodling? The answer is yes. You trace the outlines with your finger during slow walks and try not to get caught. There are rules for the cloister walk. You're meant to keep your eyes down. You walk clockwise. If someone is already walking, you follow them at a respectful distance. You do not pass. You do not stop. If you meet someone head-on, you step into a side alcove and bow. One monk, Brother Ailbe, walks with his eyes completely closed, murmuring under his breath. Probably prayers. Probably. You nearly collided with him once and he didn't flinch. Just kept drifting like a sleepwalker fueled by piety and cold barley. You found your favourite spot last week. It's near a narrow window slit facing the sea. You can't see much, just grey sky and the suggestion of water, but the wind slips through that slit like a secret. On certain days it smells like salt and rotting seaweed, on others like rain and smoke. You stand there when no one's looking and let the breeze hit your face like a whispered rebellion. And here's the thing. Your body adjusts. Your feet no longer bleed from the sandals. Your back only seizes up after 6 hours of copying instead of 4. You've learned to rotate your shoulder blades during Mass without drawing attention. You eat like a medieval squirrel. Quickly, efficiently, without unnecessary chewing noises. You sleep in 2-hour chunks and wake before the bell. You become efficient and invisible. You overhear things you're not meant to, when someone coughs a little too long, or when the abbot's assistant mutters under his breath after slipping in the garden mud. You catch the occasional forbidden word, heretic, blasphemous, Dublin. Each one clinks like dropped glass in your memory. There's a rumour, passed in gestures and raised eyebrows, about a monk who went mad and was locked in the bell tower. No one's seen him. but you've heard something up there, at night, a soft rhythmic tapping, like someone pacing in a small circle, or writing on the inside of a wooden wall. You're probably imagining it. You hope you're imagining it. The cloister also serves as punishment space. If you're caught breaking silence, you're sent to walk it barefoot for an hour, regardless of weather, in January, at dawn, while reciting penitential psalms in your head and trying not to cry. You've been lucky so far, only had to do it once after letting out an involuntary when you dropped a quill on your toe. Mercy, the stick, was briefly involved. One quirky moment from this week. Brother Male, tall, stoic, terrifying, accidentally stepped on a snail during his walk. He paused, stared down, knelt, and spent 20 minutes carving a tiny cross above the crushed shell. Then he went right back to walking. Never explained, never looked at anyone, just honoured the snail like it was a martyred bishop. And you? You're becoming part of the stone. You start to like the quiet. You even crave it. The outside world becomes fuzzy in your memory. Were there really wagons and people yelling and cheese with flavour? It all seems made up. Now, there's only stone, wind, ink, and the faint creak of your joints in the cold. Some days your voice feels like a forgotten language. You tried speaking aloud once, just a single word. "Hello," whispered into the courtyard when you were sure no one was watching. It sounded wrong, like hearing your own echo in someone else's dream. The cloister doesn't respond, just keeps being itself, grey, wet, unbothered. You keep walking. The bell rings, not like a church bell you might hear on a Sunday stroll. This one doesn't chime, it commands, a deep metallic thrum that rolls through the stone like thunder in your bones. It's the morning bell. Technically it's called the nocturne bell, but here it's just the bell, and it owns you now. It rings at exactly 3 a.m. You sit bolt upright in your cell before your eyes are even open. You don't question it. There's no snooze button, no warm covers to pull over your head, just a frigid stone floor and a robe that still hasn't forgiven you for existing. You stumble out of bed, toes curled against the cold, and splash a handful of water from the basin onto your face. It's not refreshing, it's a slap. The kind of cold that makes you forget your name for a second. Every morning starts like this, and then you move, quietly. Robe swishing, sandals scuffing, you follow the trickle of other shadowy figures down the cloister walk toward the chapel. There's no talking. Of course, just the soft murmur of breath and the occasional cough stifled into a sleeve. You join your place in the choir stalls. The candles are already lit, casting shaky halos over a dozen pale, half-asleep faces. The air smells like wax, cold stone, and old wool. Someone has clearly skipped their morning rinse. Brother Finton, probably. You try not to inhale too deeply, Lords begins. The Latin rolls out like an ancient spell. You chant along, but your voice barely registers. You're too busy keeping your knees locked so you don't collapse. The rhythm, though, it's in you now. Call and response rise and fall, punctuated by little clicks as pages turn in unison. It's strangely comforting. You once timed it. It takes 37 minutes exactly. Not that anyone's watching a clock, there are no clocks here. Time is counted in bells, in candle stubs, and in the number of psalms you've managed not to fall asleep through. Historians still debate whether monks were superhuman or just chronically under-rested. You're betting on the latter. Your spine feels like a stack of wet kindling. Your eyelids are actual weights. After Lords, there's a brief return to the cells, just long enough to splash your face again, check for lice, spoiler yes, and light your work candle. Then it's off to the scriptorium. The same one, every day. The wall's still damp, the desk still uneven, and Brother Séamus still patrolling like a medieval hall monitor with a justice kink. But the weird part, you almost look forward to it. There's something about starting the day in total silence, among people who are also half asleep, covered in candle wax and pretending this is fine. You start to feel like you're all in some grim, sacred joke together. No one's laughing, of course, that would be, well, a sin. But you feel it. The shared absurdity. And if you're lucky, today you'll be allowed to sharpen your own quill. You don't get to choose your texts, but you've learned to recognise the good ones. The Book of Hours with the tiny illuminated vines? Great. The Psalter with 20 pages of cramped footnotes from a monk who clearly hated his job? Avoid. Anything with Greek, run. One fun fact: monks sometimes use styluses to sketch tiny guidelines on the vellum before writing. You're getting good at it. Your hands still shake, but less than they used to. The lines keep your script straight, which keeps Brother Séamus from sighing deeply in your direction. You consider that a win, but even victories are short-lived here. Mid-morning bell rings, time for manual labour. Your task today? Hauling buckets of rainwater from the cistern to the laundry basin. It's uphill both ways. No, really. This place is geometrically cursed. You slip once. The water soaks your robe. The stone gets a little wetter. No one helps. Helping would require speaking, and that's not happening. A passing monk just hands you a rag and nods. You think it's sympathy. Or maybe he just wants the rag back. You dry yourself off as best you can, and return to the scriptorium with damp sleeves and dignity level set to crumb. Lunch comes. It's still not good. You eat it anyway, staring at the opposite wall with a dozen other men who also look like they've seen too much and not enough all at once. You sip your gruel. It's somehow both too hot and suspiciously cold. The bell rings again. Time for more prayer, more chanting. You open your mouth and let the Latin come out like steam from a cracked pipe. The rhythm carries you. You forget for a moment that your fingers are raw and your robe smells like rainwater and mould. It feels like floating. That's what keeps you going. Not the food, not the rules. Not the terrifying possibility of Brother Séamus discovering your poorly drawn cue from earlier. It's those moments when everything lines up, when the chant is soft and your voice joins it like a thread in a greater tapestry. When your pen moves like it remembers the way better than you do. When you stop existing as a person and just become part of the pattern. That, and maybe the occasional feast day onion. You knew you'd mess up eventually. Everyone does. The scriptorium may be sacred, but it's also a trap. One long unforgiving stretch of mental tightrope walking, where one slipped letter feels like a sin worse than pride. And today, your toe catches the rope. It starts with a smudge. A tiny, almost imperceptible blot of ink just under the tail of a G. Your hand twitched. You didn't mean to. You didn't even notice at first. Until Brother Séamus walked past, paused behind your shoulder, and made a noise so quiet, so sharp that it peeled a layer off your soul. Again, he whispers, and taps the edge of the page with mercy, his not-so-symbolic birch stick. You swallow and dip your pen. It gets worse. Your next amen looks more like anam. You skip a margin guide, you forget to breathe, and the ink gets watery from the sweat on your fingers. By the end of the page, it looks like a ransom note written by a very devout squirrel. Séamus returns. One glance, one raised eyebrow, then crack. Mercy meets your palm. A clean, quick sting. Not enough to draw blood, just enough to imprint shame. You clench your jaw and nod. No tears, no sound, not here. Historians still argue whether disciplinary methods like these were widespread or specific to more rigid monasteries. Some say the rule of St. Benedict discouraged physical punishment. Others point to letters and records, monks writing in detail about the loving correction of their superiors. You'd love to show them your hand right now. But the real punishment isn't physical. It's being reassigned. You're pulled from your current manuscript, a lovingly illuminated book of hours, halfway through a charming procession of saints with curly hair and accusing eyebrows, and handed a blank stack of calfskin and a worn stylus. Leviticus, Séamus says, all of it. You stare. He means it. You're to copy the entire book of Leviticus, from memory if you can, using nothing but an impression stylus and dry tracing parchment, so another monk can ink over it later. No ink for you, not for a while. It's the medieval equivalent of a demotion, a scribal purgatory, and Leviticus. It's not exactly page-turning drama. It's a bureaucratic fever dream of ritual laws, priestly duties, animal sacrifices, skin disease protocols, and deeply specific guidance on mildew inspection. Yes, mildew, chapter 14. You're welcome. You sigh and begin. In the tent of meeting, the Lord said to Moses, over and over, no illumination, no gold leaf, no creative flourishes, just endless columns of rules and repetition, carved gently, faintly, until your hands go numb. You can't even smell ink anymore, just vellum, wax, and your own quiet despair. But something strange happens. A few days in, your rhythm returns. Your hands stop shaking. Your tracing lines become cleaner, steadier. The repetition is maddening, but also hypnotic. There's a strange peace in losing yourself inside the rules of other people's rules. You begin to respect the absurd precision of it all. The scribal discipline that says every word matters, even the ones about mildew. Still, the other scribes look at you differently now. You're the one on punishment detail, the one who wrote anim, the one who's doing dry tracings instead of gilding the saints. You eat your meals in silence, but you feel the weight of those glances. Even if you're not allowed to talk, your reputation walks ahead of you like a disapproving ghost. A quirky moment breaks the gloom. You're cleaning ink pots after Compline, your new auxiliary punishment duty, when Brother Tomas leans in and whispers, "I once spelled Christ with an extra es." He grins. They made me copy the genealogy in Matthew 20 times. You don't laugh, but you do smile. Everyone has their scribal scars. You start to notice them more. Brother Finton's habitual twitch near page breaks. Brother Elbay's slightly shaky "ah" after the 4th hour of copying. Even Séamus, for all his terrifying discipline, has a slight limp on cold days. His knees were probably ruined by decades of kneeling penance and wielding mercy. One evening, as you're setting out parchments for tomorrow's tracing session, you find a small, folded scrap tucked beneath the stack. No name, just a single line in nearly perfect script. The Lord forgives, but Séamus does not. You don't react. You don't even blink. You slide it into your robe pocket and walk away. A piece of scribal graffiti like the cloister carvings. Quiet rebellion, preserved in ink. Later that night, you lie on your straw mattress and stare at the ceiling. You think about the countless hands that copied these texts before you, the ones who miswrote, the ones who got punished, the ones who passed down not just doctrine but smudges and symbols and angry notes in the margins. You are part of that now, a living continuation of frustration, perfectionism, and bruised palms. Your hand still aches. But the pain is starting to feel familiar, not welcome, but known. You trace the memory of anim in the air, and then you sleep. Your fingertips are black again. Not metaphorically, though sure, also that, but literally. The ink won't come out, and it probably never will. It creeps beneath your nails, stains your cuticles, marks you like a monk's version of a tattoo. A life sentence in Gothic script. You're back in the ink room this week. Promotion? Maybe. Or maybe just because Brother Séamus burned out another junior scribe and needs someone with a reasonably steady hand and only moderate sass in their eyes. Ink, you've come to learn, is a beast. It looks so pure on the page. Those sharp black lines, those perfect strokes. But behind the neatness is a chaotic stew of weirdness and alchemy. The standard black ink, iron gall, made by mixing crushed oak galls, those little lumps you find on tree branches caused by wasp larvae, with iron salts and a touch of wine or vinegar. Add a binder, usually gum arabic, and you've got a thick, dark sludge that smells like a haunted cider mill. Today, you're mixing a fresh batch. The monk supervising, Brother Cormac, known for his very long nose and very short temper, hands you a mortar and pestle, already crusted with yesterday's failed experiment. "No clumps," he says, with the deadly seriousness of someone who's seen clumpy ink destroy a year's worth of psalms. You crush, stir, and mutter a psalm under your breath, just in case the ink gods are listening. Some batches go darker than others. Some come out with a faint shimmer, like oil on water. Occasionally, if someone mismeasures the wine, you get a purple tinge. Last month, someone tried using urine instead of vinegar. Yes, urine. Allegedly, it improves flow and adhesion. Allegedly. That monk has not been seen since. Historians still argue whether urine was truly common in medieval ink, or just an occasional shortcut for monks too lazy to fetch vinegar. There's enough conflicting evidence to keep a whole room of scholars bickering for hours. You just know that batch stank for a week. Then there's red ink, made from cinnabar or red lead, or sometimes beet juice if you're desperate and don't mind your saints looking a bit like they're blushing. Red ink is precious, only used for initials, rubrics, or divine tantrums. You're not allowed to touch it yet. That's still Brother Colum's territory, and he guards it like it's made of dragon blood. Gold ink? Don't ask. Literally, do not ask. It's made by crushing actual gold leaf into powder, suspending it in honey or egg white, and applying it with a brush so fine it might as well be a single spider leg. Only the most senior scribes use it. You once leaned too close while Colin was illuminating a capital G in a gospel book. He didn't speak, but you still felt his side eye all the way through Vespers. One day, maybe. For now you stir and pour. You strain your ink through linen to catch clumps. You test it on scraped parchment. You adjust. Again. Again. This batch is slightly too thick. You add 1 drop of vinegar. Still too thick. Another drop. Too thin. Start over. It's a sacred science. Equal parts chemistry, prayer, and the slow unravelling of your last nerve. Your sleeves are dotted with stains. Your nose itches, but your hands are covered in tarry blackness. You learn the sacred scribal shrug. I will deal with this later. A quirky moment. While cleaning out an old inkstone, you find a curled piece of parchment wedged in the bottom. It's tiny, folded like a letter. You unroll it carefully with the tip of your stylus. It says in cramped but elegant script, "Don't trust the red ink." No signature, just that. You sit back and stare at it for a while. Then you refold it and tuck it behind your own inkstone. For the next poor soul. It's a tradition now. You return to the scriptorium with your fresh ink carefully sealed in a stoppered horn. You take your seat, you exhale, and then you write. This is the part people don't talk about. The moment when the ink behaves, when it flows like silk, when your hand and the quill and the page all align just for a little while. The letters come out crisp and clear. The spacing, beautiful. The margins, heavenly. Even Brother Séamus pauses as he passes and does not sigh. That's basically a compliment. You're working on a sermon from Augustine. It's dense but rhythmic. Lots of deus and veritas and dramatic sentences that seem to rise like waves and crash with conviction. You almost forget to breathe while writing. And then, ink blot. Just a little one. Barely noticeable. But you see it. It lands on the curve of an R, fat and wet and irrefutable. You freeze. Then you grab the penknife and gently scrape. The trick is not to tear the parchment. You've gotten better at it. The skin lifts like a whisper. You correct the line. You ink over it. Crisis averted. There's a saying here, a good scribe is invisible. That means no mistakes, no signature, no commentary. You copy what's given. You copy it perfectly, and then you vanish behind it. But sometimes, late at night, you wonder if maybe somewhere you'll leave your mark. Not in the main text. No, that would be unthinkable. But in the ink, in the strange consistency of your black, in the exact tilt of your uncial A, in the way you pause just a fraction longer before writing the word eternitas. You wonder if someone centuries from now will notice. You wonder if someone already has. You sit down in the scriptorium, your quill freshly trimmed, your ink precisely balanced, not too thin, not too gloppy. And you stare at today's assignment. Greek. Oh no. You don't read Greek. You don't even pretend to read Greek. You've seen a few letters scratched in the corners of older manuscripts, sure. And maybe you've copied the odd omega or lambda here and there. But this is a full page of slanted serpentine madness. Medical, by the look of it. Some ancient physician's fever dream, full of fluids and fevers and suspiciously few vowels. You're absolutely, gloriously, utterly unqualified, but you pick up your quill anyway. Because here's the great secret of being a scribe in an Irish monastery. You don't need to understand what you're writing. Understanding is optional. Reproduction is mandatory. You copy the text as it appears, letter by unfamiliar letter. You mimic the curves, the spacing, the little breath marks. You don't know what it says. You don't care. Your job is not to think. Your job is to copy. You could be transcribing the recipe for poisoned fig pudding and you'd never know. Just another day in the scriptorium. Historians still argue whether most monks were functionally literate in all the languages they copied. Some believe monks only understood the Latin texts and mimic the rest by rote. Others argue for basic training in Greek, Hebrew, and even the occasional touch of Syriac. The truth likely lies somewhere in the middle, depending on the monastery, the century, and the tolerance level of Brother Séamus. Today's task appears to be some Galenic treatise on humours. You recognise the Latin phrase, sanguis calidus et humidus, hot and moist blood. Delightful. The rest? Pure squiggle. But the diagrams help. You reach a section with illustrations, anatomical sketches, drawn in wobbly red ink, a human body splayed open like a saint in a fever dream. The heart is oddly pear-shaped. The liver looks like a sun hat. You glance sideways at Brother Padraig's version. His liver looks angrier than yours. You adjust. You wonder who the original author was. Some Greek physician, writing under torchlight, maybe drunk on honey wine and fever medicine, sketching out what he thinks a spleen does. Now 1,000 years later, you're copying his guesswork with religious fervour. The parchment is unusually smooth today, good quality calfskin, probably imported. You wonder which poor beast was destined for saintly preservation. There's a faint notch in one corner, where someone's stylus once pressed too hard. You wonder who that was. Someone like you, perhaps. Confused, sleepy, copying medical advice in a language he didn't speak. There's a strange kind of comfort in that, a quirky note. The margin beside the spleen diagram contains a doodle of a tiny rabbit holding a lancet. You blink, look again. Yep, still there. Clearly centuries old. The ink has faded, but the lines are neat, confident. You glance around the room to make sure no one's watching, then add a tiny carrot beside it. Your rebellion is microscopic, but it's yours. The more you write, the less the words mean. They become shapes, symbols, a dance of ink and muscle memory. You fall into rhythm. Your body writes. Your mind wanders. You think of your old name, which you're not supposed to use anymore. You think of your old life, which feels like a dream now. Fields, trees, laughter, cheese with actual flavour. You wonder what you'd be doing if you hadn't arrived at the monastery. Then you blot the Omicron you just smeared and realise that wondering is dangerous. Wondering leads to questions, and questions lead to vinegar scrubbing and extra psalms. So you keep writing. The strange thing? You're starting to enjoy it. Not because you understand the text, but because the act of copying, carefully, intentionally, with perfect lines and curled accents, feels like a spell. Like each mark is a talisman against chaos. You reach the end of the page and feel something like pride. Then Brother Séamus appears. He doesn't say anything, just holds out his hand. You pass him your sheet. He scans it, eyes flicking left to right. He pauses at the doodle. You freeze. Then he says nothing, just lowers the page and walks away. You exhale. Later, during evening prayers, you notice a fresh line added in the scriptorium ledger. Brother, your assigned name. Greek transcription passable. Recommend further assignment. Passable. You nearly smile. That night in your cell, you close your eyes and see letters behind your eyelids. Alpha, Gamma, Sigma. Not meanings, just forms. Shadows dancing in ink. You drift to sleep wondering what your body would look like if drawn by a half-blind monk in red ink. You decide. Very weird. You hear him before you see him. The rhythm of his steps down the cloister is unmistakable. Slow, precise, and oddly sniffy. It's the abbot. And somehow you already know you're in trouble. He's not a large man, not physically. He's wiry, severe, with the sharp features of someone carved directly from oak. But his presence moves like smoke through the abbey. Quiet, choking, inescapable. Monks go rigid when he passes. Even Séamus straightens his back and adjusts his scapula. The abbot stops in front of your desk in the scriptorium. He leans in slightly, nose leading the way like some ancient bloodhound on the trail of sin. You resist the instinct to sneeze. He sniffs once, twice, then he speaks. You skipped penance. Your spine cracks just from standing straighter. You want to object. Really you do. You did your penance. You scrubbed the floor until your knees wept. You copied the Psalms from memory. You even skipped the onion on feast day. But apparently none of that is enough for this man who sniffs out guilt like it's wafting from your soul. Historians still debate whether monastic leaders like this were naturally inclined towards spiritual insight, or just had an incredibly well-honed sense of passive aggression. The current theory, a bit of both. You will copy Leviticus again, he says flatly. 7 times. 7. That's not a number, that's a curse. You nod. There is no argument. There is only survival. Your new workstation is in the secondary scriptorium, a less refined chamber off the main hall, where the air is thicker, the benches are older, and the candles sputter like they're trying to die. This is the punishment room. The ink here is cold, the quills untrimmed. The pages are made of rougher vellum, some with hair still visible. You're very much not the favoured child of the monastery right now. Your task, copy the entire book of Leviticus, again, 7 times, word for word. No adornment, no illumination, just line after line of divine law. You get to work. In the tent of meeting, the Lord said to Moses, again, the laws tumble down the page. Sacrifices for sin, sacrifices for guilt, rules for priests, rules for cleansing lepers, rules for goats, rules for mould. The words blur, your wrist cramps, your ink dries too quickly then too slowly. The pages curl at the edges. One passage you now know by heart. If mildew reappears in the house, after the stones have been torn out, the house is unclean. You write it with the grim pride of someone who has lived this metaphor. On day 3, you develop a twitch in your left eye. You don't mention it. On day 5, you see the word mildew in your soup. On day 6, you find yourself silently correcting a priest during evening prayers. You think, actually it's Leviticus 14:45, not 44. You feel shame, and also pride. A quirky moment breaks the gloom. Tucked inside one of the older vellum stacks, you find a pressed clover, perfect, greenish-brown, still intact. Between verses about sin offerings and entrail disposal, someone long ago preserved a tiny, fragile piece of the outside world. You stare at it for a long time before slipping it into your sleeve. Then you get back to mildew. You're allowed no company in this room, save for Brother Osric. Ancient, mostly silent and constantly asleep in his corner. You think he's here to supervise. But really he just wheezes gently beside the door, clutching an empty ink pot like a relic. Sometimes, in your haze, you swear the text shifts. A verse will read slightly differently than before, or maybe that's the exhaustion. Or maybe the scribes before you made small changes, tiny ones, imperceptible to those not copying the same passage 7 times in a row. Historians argue about this too. Some manuscripts show consistent copying. Others? Not so much. One infamous copy of Leviticus replaces sprinkling of blood with spring-like blood, turning a grisly ritual into a poetic metaphor. Maybe a slip, maybe not. By the end of the week, your fingers are stained, your eyes are red, and your margins are miraculously straight. The abbot returns. He inspects your stack without speaking, flips through it like flipping through your mind. Finally he nods. Acceptable, he says. Which as monk speak for, you are no longer on the verge of excommunication. He leaves. You don't smile, but you do feel the corners of your soul unclench just a little. Later that evening, Brother Séamus pats you on the back. It's not warm, it's more like being struck by a short, hairy log. But still, it's affection, monastery style. You eat that night in near bliss, even though it's the same gruel and barley and sad cabbage. You eat it with the satisfaction of someone who has emerged from mildew-related penance with their fingers and sanity mostly intact. As you lie in bed that night, your mind echoes with Leviticus. The words loop and fold in on themselves. You whisper a line to the ceiling. He shall then take a cedar stick, a scarlet yarn, and hyssop. Then you sleep like the dead. You discover the hidden alcove entirely by accident. It's after Compline, the final prayer of the day, and you've been assigned candle duty, snuffing out flames in the upper choir loft while muttering something halfway between a psalm and a curse. Your knees ache. The wax has dripped onto your fingers, again. Your patience with fire has dwindled to nothing. Then, behind the altar rail, you notice something odd. A draught, cold and steady like it has a destination. You follow it to a narrow panel, tucked in the corner, half swallowed by the wall's shadow. At first it seems like nothing, just a break in the stonework. But when you run your hand along the edge, it shifts under your fingers. You push. It creaks. Behind it, a dark space barely wider than your shoulders, lined with rough stone and dust that smells like old beeswax and parchment. You should walk away. You know that. Nothing good happens when monks poke around in places they shouldn't. But curiosity is the last sin to leave a scribe's heart. You squeeze through. Inside is silence, thicker than usual, wrapped in a closeness that makes your ears ring. The space narrows, then opens into a tiny chamber, no larger than a cupboard. A single stone shelf runs along the wall. On it, a wooden chest, iron-bound, locked. Of course it's locked. You run your fingers along the lid. Dust kicks up in tiny clouds. The iron is old, but the hinges are polished like someone's been opening it. Recently, there's no key in sight. But next to the chest is a cloth bundle, carefully tied and pressed flat. You hesitate, then untie it. Inside, loose pages, vellum, soft with age. The ink is reddish, like dried blood. The script is unfamiliar, narrower, angular, unlike the wide, curling Irish hand you're used to. Diagrams cover many of the pages, celestial wheels, strange alchemical sigils, even a map of stars that doesn't match any you've seen. Your breath hitches. You know, instinctively, that you shouldn't be looking at this. These aren't sacred texts. These are other, fringe, forbidden. Historians still debate the presence of esoteric texts in monastic libraries. Officially, most abbeys rejected anything not strictly devotional, but manuscripts have a habit of slipping through. Sometimes monks smuggled in Greek philosophies, Arabic medicine, even grimoires. Sometimes these texts were hidden. Sometimes they were burned. This one? Hidden. You flip through a few pages, careful not to let the waxy binding smear. There's a line written in faded Latin, Stella regunt sed non absolvent. The stars rule, but they do not forgive. Okay then, you bundle the pages back up and replace them exactly as you found them. The chest you leave untouched. Whatever's in there, if you open it now, you might never sleep again, and sleep in a monastery is already on shaky ground. You slip out of the alcove, close the panel behind you, and rejoin the world. No one notices your absence, or if they do, they say nothing. But you notice everything. For days after, you can't stop thinking about those pages, the diagrams, the red ink, the warning. You begin looking differently at the abbot's private library, at the locked cabinet near Brother Séamus's desk. How many other secrets sit behind these stone walls wrapped in dust and fear? A quirky moment. During your next scriptorium shift, you're assigned a text to copy, a plain theological treatise, nothing remarkable. But halfway through, you spot a strange margin note from a previous scribe. The stars bend to ink. You pause. Coincidence? You look closer. The note is faded, written in a fine hand you now recognise. The same angular script from the alcove. Someone's left a trail. You try not to shiver. From that point on, your eyes drift to the margins of every manuscript you're given. Most contain nothing, but some have tiny marks, constellation sketches, a curled moon symbol beside the word soul, a line of minuscule text running up the side of the page, barely readable. You're not the only one who's found the chest, and yet no one speaks of it. Not a word, not even a glance. The next time you're on candle duty, you walk by the alcove but don't go in. Still, you feel it watching, a space with memory, and you? You start copying more carefully, not just the words, but the spaces between them. You're definitely seeing things now. It starts as a flicker in the corner of your eye. Letters shift, lines wobble, the ink seems to breathe on the page. You blink, and everything snaps back. But not before a marginal cue briefly resembles a startled owl. Sleep deprivation probably. You've been working late, rising early and trying, foolishly, to decipher those forbidden diagrams in your mind after Compline. Your dreams are now mostly stars and spirals. One night, you wake convinced your spine is shaped like a sigil. You sketch it on your bedpost in candle wax. The next morning, it's gone. During the third hour of copying that day, your vision blurs. You pause, rub your temples. Brother Padraig mutters something about eye-strained demons and hands you a scrap of lavender tucked in a page from Job. You're not sure if it's a joke, a remedy, or a curse. You stuff it into your sleeve anyway. The candlelight doesn't help. Everything in the scriptorium is lit by wax or tallow, each flame swaying with the wind that shouldn't even be in the room. Your desk always seems to be near the coldest draught, and as the wax melts, it runs down the holders like ghostly tears, pooling at your elbow as you hunch over the text. You've started seeing movement in the margins. No, really, tiny things. A figure that wasn't there yesterday. A monk, perhaps, with absurdly long legs, a snail trailing behind a lion, a man biting a fish biting a foot, classic monastic doodles. Only you're fairly certain you didn't draw them, and they weren't there when you inked the page. You try pointing one out to Brother Colum, he squints. That's been there since last Lent. You stare. It's fresh. The ink's still glossy. You don't argue. Historians still argue whether monastic hallucinations were divine, demonic, or just byproducts of sleep-deprived zealotry and candle smoke. You're starting to believe it's all three, especially when your quill moves on its own for a full second before you realise your hand just went numb. One night, you're writing the word Gloria when the G unfurls on the page like a snake. It doesn't slither exactly, it ripples. You flinch, drop your quill and blink furiously. Just ink. Just Latin. Just lack of sleep. Nothing more, right? You notice Brother Séamus watching you that evening. His face unreadable. But he taps his desk once before walking past. That's his way of saying, steady yourself. Or maybe, stop copying things that copy you back. You start rubbing rosemary oil under your eyes, supposed to sharpen sight according to Brother Osric, who once told you lemon balm could cure envy. You're not convinced, but the scent helps keep you awake, and you'll try anything short of exorcism. The hallucinations, or revelations if you're feeling poetic, don't stop. You see faces in the wax, you hear whispering during matins, you find yourself copying phrases that aren't in the original manuscript. You catch them just in time, usually. But once you leave a line intact. The candle knows your name. You scrape it out, hands shaking. Later that day, Brother Finton hands you a note folded into a scrap of vellum. No words, just a drawing of a candle with teeth. You don't respond. Another night you wake to find your candle still burning. You're sure you blew it out. It's flickering near your bedpost, casting a long trembling shadow up the wall, longer than any figure in the room. You sit frozen, watching it sway, until the wick dies with a whisper. You report none of this. Because here's the thing, you don't want to be reassigned to the cellar. That's where they send scribes who get too shaky, too twitchy. There's a wordless understanding among the monks. Better a haunted mind than a broken one. A quirky moment. Brother Mael, the stoic with a penchant for snail funerals, once turned to you mid-vespers and whispered, "The Virgin winked at me last Tuesday. Just once. Very respectfully." Then returned to chanting like nothing happened. So no, you're not alone. The longer you stay, the thinner the veil gets between what should be and what might be. You're writing words written by hundreds of hands before yours, over centuries, under stars that no longer shine. Every blot, every curl, every slip of the quill connects you to scribes long dead, and maybe not entirely gone. You wonder if the monastery is haunted, not by ghosts, but by memory, by the sheer weight of repetition. You trace a letter slowly, an M. It watches you. You blink. Just ink. You'd give a lot for a roasted turnip right now, or even just bread that doesn't double as a whetstone. Because let's be honest, the food in this place makes penitence feel optional. You're already suffering. Breakfast is a polite fiction. It's often a cold, grey porridge that exists primarily as a texture challenge. Technically it's barley. Practically it's regret. Served in wooden bowls so old they've developed personalities. Yours has a crack that leaks just enough to be annoying, but not enough to get replaced. Lunch isn't much better. Boiled grains, sometimes beans, sometimes something that looks like cabbage and tastes like holy water that's lost the will to live. If it's a feast day, you might get an onion. A whole one. Unseasoned. Served with the kind of ceremony usually reserved for royal relics. You remember the first time you were handed an onion. Everyone stared. You didn't know whether to cry from joy or the fumes. You ate it raw, and immediately understood why monks have so many silent contemplation hours. They're just recovering from the digestive trauma. Dinner? Often skipped entirely. A discipline of hunger, they call it, which is poetic and also just starvation in a robe. The idea, of course, is humility. Food is fuel, not pleasure. No feasting, no indulging, no seconds. The rule of saint. Benedict lays it out. 1 meal a day in summer, 2 in winter, and always eaten in silence. It's not about enjoyment, it's about obedience. Historians still debate how strictly these dietary rules were followed. Some argue that abbeys in colder regions allowed more lenience. Others say loopholes abounded, feast days for obscure saints, for example, or medicinal wine that just happened to be very strong and very frequent. Your monastery? Not lenient. You eat in the refectory, seated on long wooden benches side by side, never facing each other. The food is served without eye contact. No one speaks. The only sound is the scraping of spoons and the occasional throat clearing, followed by glares because you're not supposed to make noise. Instead of conversation, there's a reader. One monk stands at a lectern and reads from a holy text, usually something edifying and cheerful, like martyrdoms or plague chronicles. You try to listen, but honestly, you're too focused on trying to chew with spiritual purpose. One quirky moment. During a reading from the Dialogues of Gregory the Great, the monk accidentally said, "beheaded the bishop's cat," instead of caput. Several monks coughed pointedly. One snorted. "You bit your tongue so hard you tasted copper." The reader never flinched. But that night every monk's illustration page featured a very smug cat. You try not to fantasize about food, but you do. You dream about honey, about bread still warm from the oven, crusty and golden, instead of soft and grey and damp like it's been pre-chewed by angels with no teeth. You think about butter so vivid you can feel the knife gliding across it. Apples, nuts, cheese that doesn't shiver when touched. You wake from those dreams ashamed and hungry. There are herbs in the garden, but they're mostly for medicine, or so you're told. You once caught Brother Finton chewing mint leaves during prayer. He claimed it was for stomach discipline. You saw the smirk. It was definitely flavour rebellion. Some monks cultivate quiet rebellions. A sprinkle of salt hidden in a sleeve, a few berries palmed from the garden, a piece of dried fish hoarded like a relic. You've never dared. But you understand the temptation. Once someone left a tiny dried plum under your writing board. No note, no explanation. Just there. A gift. You stared at it for a full hour, then ate it. Slowly. Reverently. You still think about that plum. During Lent, the meals become even more austere. Less grain, more fasting, more silence. One monk eats so slowly it feels like performance art. You count the number of chews per spoonful. 47. Respect. Despite the deprivation, no one seems malnourished. Not exactly. You're lean now, hollowed out, but alert. Monastic hunger sharpens your senses, makes you hear every creak in the walls, makes the smell of baking rye from the village below drift up the hill and haunt your nostrils for hours. You've stopped expecting flavour. Instead, you look for texture, a crunch in a root vegetable, the softness of stewed lentils, the way your teeth slip through boiled barley like a pen through vellum. It's almost meditative. You begin to understand why monks record food miracles with such intensity. A single fish feeding a monastery, a jug of oil never emptying. That's not just faith, that's culinary euphoria. Once, during a storm, a farmer donated a basket of apples to the abbey. Red, round, real apples. The abbot gave one to each monk. You bit into it and nearly wept. It tasted like the Garden of Eden. You swore it smelled like cinnamon. It didn't. Your brain made that up. You savoured every bite. The core sat on your desk for days before you finally threw it out. A tiny altar to forbidden sweetness. These days, you eat what you're given. You chew with purpose. You endure the gruel. And on feast days, when the onion arrives on a silver plate, you don't just eat it, you honour it. You should have kept your mouth shut. No, really, that's not rhetorical. You opened your mouth, and curiosity spilled out like ink over a page. It was a single question, just one. You'd been reviewing an old manuscript, a Latin treatise copied so many times that the letters practically groaned from repetition. In the margin, a diagram, constellations, the Pleiades, and something that looked suspiciously like a serpent coiled around a compass. You whispered to Brother Elbe, seated beside you, quietly, reverently, barely audible. What does that symbol mean? He froze mid-quill stroke, blinked once, then very slowly lowered his pen. For 3 long seconds nothing happened. Then he stood, walked away, and didn't return for the rest of the session. Later that day, you were summoned, by the abbot himself. No words exchanged, just a look, that glacial, all-seeing look. He gestured toward a bucket, a brush, and a small earthen jug. Vinegar. You already knew what it meant. Welcome to floor scrubbing duty. Every corridor, every stone, until your shoulders sting and your hands look like the surface of overused parchment. Historians still argue whether monks truly enforced absolute silence around esoteric material, or whether they simply discouraged distraction. But in your monastery, asking the wrong question means penance. Always penance. They never answer. They just assign consequences. For a week, you clean. You scrub the refectory floors, your knees aching on cold stone. You wash the steps leading to the chapel, carefully, methodically, as Brother Séamus watches like a hawk with a ruler. You even scrub the cloister walk where moss grows faster than prayers. You're not alone, though. Other monks pass you. Some nod subtly. Some leave a bucket. One leaves a scrap of dry bread wrapped in linen. No name, no note. You eat it behind the herb wall. It tastes like forgiveness. During one of your scrubbing sessions in the northern wing, you stumble across another oddity. A loose tile. Of course you investigate. Beneath it, a folded page. One side is covered in faded Latin. The other, Greek. The ink is brown, cracked with age, but unmistakably unusual. The Greek text seems to reference planetary movement. The Latin, something about hidden harmonies. You don't understand it, but you recognise the angular script from the forbidden bundle behind the choir loft. You slip it into your robe. Another mistake. That night, as you clean the wax drip beneath the altar candles, you feel it. A presence. Nothing you can see, just a pressure in the air like a held breath. The flickering of the candle seems to slow, and for a second the shadows on the wall resemble movement. A tall figure, robed, watching. You blink. It's gone. You return to your cell, shaking. You tuck the page beneath your mattress, praying no one ever finds it. Not because you fear excommunication, but because something about it feels aware. A quirky moment. The next morning, Brother Thomas gives you a wink during matins. He rarely shows expression, but today he seems amused, as if he knows. Maybe he does. After your week of vinegar and shame, you're finally allowed back into the scriptorium. But there's a chill. Not in the air, in the glances. Brothers avoid your eyes. Séamus inspects your work more closely than usual. Even Colum, who once offered you his spare quill, simply nods and moves away. You're marked now. Not punished, not publicly, but watched. You work quietly. You avoid questions. You never again ask about diagrams in the margins. But that page under your mattress? You read it every night now. By candlelight, with your blanket pulled up like a cloak. You trace the diagrams. You memorize the phrases. You whisper them under your breath. One line keeps returning. In silence the heavens speak. You begin to hear the stars again. Not in sound, in patterns. Candle flickers, footsteps, ink flow. Something has changed. Your curiosity has become your heresy, but you can't stop. Because somewhere behind these walls, beyond the chants and mildew and onions and silence, there's a truth you were never meant to copy, only to find. It starts with a scent, smoke. At first, you think it's from the kitchen. Maybe someone scorched the barley again, which wouldn't be a first. But then you see it. A grey curl, threading up past the stone archway of the west wing. Thickening, moving too fast. Your heart lurches. Fire. You bolt from your desk, upending your inkwell. Black liquid splattering your vellum, your robe, the psalms you were halfway through transcribing. The entire scriptorium is suddenly alive with motion, and that's what's terrifying. Because motion means noise. Dozens of monks, usually silent as the grave, scramble into action. Robes swishing, sandals slapping. Someone knocks over a bench. Another shouts, "The vellum room!" That word. Shout. In this place, it's an earthquake. You sprint behind Brother Padrig toward the inner scriptorium. The smell hits you first. Acrid, raw, unmistakable. Burning wood, smouldering wax, hot ink. The outer wall near the storage alcove is blazing. Candles toppled. A curtain, linen probably dragged too close to the flames, has become a sheet of fire licking up the side of a bookcase. You freeze, because inside that bookcase are not just common volumes, not just psalters and sermon texts. That's the cabinet that stores the good stuff. Early Gospels, the St. Ied fragment, the Greek-Latin hybrid glossary. Brother Séamus once wept over, in secret of course. He claimed it was a brief sinus infection. There's no time to save it all. Monks form a chain, passing buckets from the well, throwing robes over flames, shouting instructions that no one hears because no one knows how to shout anymore. One brother smashes a window with a processional cross to let the smoke out. Another collapses from the heat, barely caught by two others. You grab the nearest manuscript to temporibus and bolt from the room, heart hammering. Your robe catches on a splinter of wood. You don't even stop. You save 3 volumes. One is blank on both sides. One is damp. One is the wrong de temporibus, a lesser-known deeply boring calendar written by someone who believed Lent should last 122 days. Still, you cradle it like treasure. Behind you, the fire is finally dying. Ash smokes up into the beams. You're coughing. You're covered in soot. Brother Miles' eyebrows are gone. You don't comment. The aftermath is worse. The next morning, the scriptorium is half dark. Charred beams, scorched parchments, one of the big lecterns reduced to a black ribcage of wood. The scent of fire clings to every stone like memory. Brother Column, silent, unshakable Column, is seen kneeling in the ashes, tracing letters in the soot. You don't approach. The abbot holds a special silence afterward. No prayers, no chants, just a long stone-cold meal in the refectory, where everyone avoids eye contact. Grief hangs in the air like smoke. You've lost 30 manuscripts. Most are replaceable, some are not. One, Vita Sanctae Dorica, a biography written in a now-extinct dialect, was one of only 2 known copies. The other, gone in a Viking raid centuries ago. Historians still argue whether monks prioritised preservation or martyrdom in the face of fire. Many chose both. You understand that now. Because when the fire came, you didn't think about safety. You thought about ink, about pages, about names that would be lost if you didn't run. You sit in your cell that night, your hands still shaking. You stare at your fingertips, stained with soot, ink, maybe blood from a splinter. You try to pray, but the words feel dry in your mouth. Instead, you whisper the names of the manuscripts lost. You whisper them like eulogies. A quirky detail. Someone, no one claims it, sketched a tiny phoenix in the scriptorium's north wall the next day, just above the scorched floor, done in fresh ink, wings rising from the ash. No one removes it. You keep walking by it, every day, and slowly work resumes. You're given new vellum, new ink, a new task, copying from memory, rebuilding from the remains. It's not the same, but it's something. You dip your quill, you begin again. In the beginning, you're working late, head bowed low over your desk when you see it. Not a shadow, not a whisper, but a doodle. It's in the lower margin of a page of sermons, left by some unknown scribe years, maybe centuries before you. Barely the size of a fingernail. You squint. It's a rabbit jousting with a snail. You blink. Look again. It's still there. The rabbit wears armour. The snail has a shield. The two charge each other across the blank space between a sermon on sin and a passage about charity. You laugh. Quietly. Carefully. You're not that reckless. Because you've just stumbled across one of the monastery's most subversive secrets, the marginalia. They're everywhere, if you know where to look. Tiny, mischievous little drawings that monks have been tucking into the edges of their pages since before you arrived. Most readers never see them, but you do now. You can't stop seeing them. A man playing bagpipes with his nose, a monk battling a goose, a nun chasing a chicken with a sword, saints with exaggerated noses, devils mooning angels. You even find a bear riding a unicycle. Okay, not really a unicycle, but something suspiciously wheel-like. And once you notice them, it's like the entire monastery opens up sideways. You start scanning margins during meals, during prayer, even during Séamus's lectures on ink viscosity. He thinks you're just being studious. You're actually hunting farting demons. Yes, there are farting demons. Drawn, quite confidently, in red ink beside the canticles. Historians still argue why these absurd illustrations appear in such sacred contexts. Were they distractions, secret jokes, acts of rebellion? Some say they were mnemonic devices, ways to help remember passages. Others believe they were quiet protests against the grind of monastic life. You're voting for mental survival strategy. Because you know now how endless the work is, how many days blur together in ink and vellum, how your fingers start to ache in shapes, and how your brain, starved of novelty, starts to reach sideways, to the edges, to the margins. You find your favourite, a small monk with a massive quill drowning under a wave of his own ink. You want to frame it, or at least nod solemnly every time you pass it. And here's the best part. The monks don't talk about them. Not openly, but they all know. One day, you accidentally let your quill trail off the page while copying from Matthew. The tail curls into a little spiral. You start to scrape it away, until Brother Padrig leans over and says almost inaudibly, "Leave it. Looks like a snail." You stare. He walks away. So you start leaving things too. Small things. Nothing bold. A tiny vine curling from a capital. A mouse chasing a crumb. An angel with very tired eyes. Just enough to say, I was here. I was bored. Forgive me. And they do forgive. Because the pages forgive, the margins forgive. The margins are a safe place to be human. One night during candle duty, you sneak into the older vaults and flip through a tattered antiphonary. You find the signature of a monk long dead. Frater Nile, dated 1203. Next to it, a pig reading a book. You like Nile instantly. A quirky moment. Someone begins adding notes to your drawings. Next to your mouse, a crumb appears. Next to your tired angel, someone adds a mug. On the back of one page, next to your doodle of a fish on stilts, someone scrawls, "He is late for choir." You feel like you're in a secret conversation. You never find out who it is, but you start responding, in drawings, in gestures. Once, in a perfectly hidden Latin phrase, et piscis ambulat. The fish walks. It's not rebellious. Not quite. It's survival. A flicker of personality in a life that demands you erase yourself. Because here's the truth. Monks may not speak, but they write. And sometimes they write sideways. The scriptorium may be about perfection, devotion, transmission. But the margins are where you live, where you joke, where you confess, where you scratch a sketch of brother Séamus looking particularly constipated. You erase that one, quickly. But it felt good. You start to feel less alone, not because anyone's talking to you, but because someone else, maybe centuries ago, also got bored during Leviticus. Also snuck a dragon into the genealogy of Christ. Also stared at a blank corner of vellum and thought, what if a cat wore boots? You draw the boots, and you sleep easier. The first horn sounds at dawn. Not your bell. A horn. Low. Guttural. Too far away to be real, but it is. You know it's real because every monk in the cloister freezes mid-step. Even brother Séamus halts mid-turn, candle raised like a sword in a dark hall. Another horn. Closer. The abbot appears in the courtyard like summoned smoke. He raises one hand. No words, no panic, but his face is tight. You've heard the stories. All monks have. They're told quietly, often with a strange mixture of awe and terror. The Vikings. You thought they were legends, something that happened long ago to other monasteries, other coastlines. But now they're here. You're ushered inside, not to pray, not to prepare, to hide. Everyone knows their role. Some monks move the most precious manuscripts, bindings cracked with age, ink so faint it looks like breath, into a hidden vault beneath the chapel. Others bar the heavy doors. A few disappear into passages you didn't know existed. One, you notice, carries only a single book, pressed to his chest like a child. You don't ask what it is. You're ordered to the cellar. You clutch a bundle of vellum so tightly it wrinkles. It's the copy of the rule you've been working on, unfinished, barely legible in the margins, but you carry it like it matters. Because it does. Because everything here, this scriptorium, this rhythm, this monastic silence, can disappear in an hour. Down in the dark, the cellar is stone and mould and panic. No one speaks. Not because they're following the rule, but because breath is a precious commodity now. One wrong move, and the wooden steps above you betray it all. You sit, you listen. Above, the sounds begin. Of boots, cracking wood, voices shouting in a language you don't know but feel in your marrow. Metal clanging, a crash, something burning. Your fingers tighten on the manuscript. You're not praying, not exactly. You're remembering every line, every page, every saint whose name you wrote. Historians debate the extent of Viking destruction. Some claim many monks were spared, others say entire abbeys were levelled. What is certain, the raiders came for gold, for food, for books they couldn't read but knew were valuable. Some manuscripts ended up overseas, some were used for kindling. One might be the ash you smelled in the wind. The cellar door creaks once. Everyone holds their breath. Then, silence. You wait for the rest of the day. Maybe two. When the trapdoor is finally lifted, the sun has moved. The air smells like smoke and seaweed. You climb out slowly, blinking against the light. The abbey stands. Mostly, a few broken doors, a few scattered possessions. The altar cloth is missing. A wall has collapsed in the dormitory. But the worst part, the library. The outer shelves are gone. Ransacked. Torn bindings litter the floor like shredded birds. You kneel, gently gather a half-burned page. Qui habitat in adiutorio altissimi, the first line of Psalm 91. He who dwells in the shelter of the Most High, it curls in your hand, ash black but still readable. You carry it to the scriptorium, sit at your desk, open to a new page, begin again. Incipit Salmus. One of the brothers finds his marginal snail page burned. He redraws it the next day. This time, the snail wears a tiny helmet, a quirky moment. Brother Tomas, who hasn't spoken in 5 years, clears his throat, leans over during binding repair and whispers, "They didn't touch the cellar wine," then walks away. Small mercies. In the days that follow, the monastery becomes quieter than before. The silence now isn't spiritual, it's raw. Grief and disbelief folded into the walls like smoke into stone. But the work resumes, the ink flows, the psalms continue, and someone, maybe you, maybe not, begins copying the rule again, from memory, line by line. Because if the Vikings come again, you'll need to start over. And the monks here always start over, because this isn't just about faith, or duty, or boredom management via ink. It's about defiance. You're preserving not just texts, but identity, culture, the memory of a world that burns then rebuilds, one quill stroke at a time. He arrives at dusk just as the bells toll for vespers. You hear him before you see him. The soft crunch of boots on gravel, the clink of a walking staff. A monk-shaped silhouette passes through the gate without a word, and though no one challenges him, you can feel the unease ripple down the cloister like a chill wind. He doesn't speak, doesn't bow, just nods to the abbot and is led inside. He's not from here. You can tell by his robe, rougher, darker, dusted with salt as if he's walked a long road beside a longer sea. His hair is cropped shorter than rule permits. His hands are wrapped in cloth strips, ink-stained, cracked, and twitching ever so slightly as if still gripping a phantom pen. And his eyes linger, too long. On the scriptorium door, on the shelf by the vestry, on the wall just beneath the choir loft. He's seen the alcove. You're assigned to shadow him. Not officially, of course. The abbot would never say that. But when you're told to assist the new brother with supplies, candles, a tour of the scriptorium, you understand what's expected. He introduces himself only as Brother Alexios. No last name, no monastery, just that. You try small talk. Have you worked in many libraries, you ask as you pass him a clean sheaf of vellum. He smiles, small, unreadable. Enough to know the dangerous ones. You don't ask what that means, you just show him to his desk. And that's when things get strange. He doesn't write like the others. Most scribes follow form, careful, measured, breathing with the cadence of each stroke, but not Alexios. He writes fast, aggressively. Script you don't recognize, almost geometric with sweeping ligatures and sharp turns. It looks like Latin, but some of the words twist midline into something else entirely. You report this to Brother Séamus. He observes for a moment, says nothing, then assigns you to sit across from Alexios every day until further notice. Copy alongside him, Séamus says, quietly. You nod. Quietly. So you do. And every day you watch. You notice the little things. The way Alexios always dips his pen twice before writing a capital. The way he whispers, not prayers, but syllables you can't quite catch, as he draws certain symbols. The way he spends more time staring at margins than text. One morning, he catches you glancing at his notes. Curious, he asks, raising an eyebrow. You nearly deny it, but your mouth moves without permission. What's in the chest behind the choir loft? He doesn't blink, doesn't smile, he just leans in so close you can smell the salt and ink on his skin. Things older than scripture, he murmurs, then returns to writing. You don't speak again for 2 days. Historians still argue about wanderers like Alexios, lone monks from eastern libraries, or lost scriptoria in the Alps or Syria, appearing with strange books and stranger habits. Some were welcomed, some vanished, some left behind texts that defied classification. You suspect Alexios is one of those. One evening, you pass by his cell. The door's cracked open. Inside, you see him kneeling, not in prayer, but copying something by candlelight onto a piece of bark. Not vellum, not parchment, bark. The writing glows faintly red in the candlelight, not metallic, not paint, just wrong. He doesn't see you. You step back. That night you dream of books with no pages, just openings, black, endless, whispering through the spine. A quirky moment. Brother Thomas begins leaving candles beside your desk in the shape of tiny constellations. You don't know if he's trying to warn you or cheer you up. Either way, the candle arrangement for Taurus nearly sets your sleeve on fire. You're not the only one disturbed. Brother Padraig starts praying more loudly than usual. Brother Fintan asks to switch desks, citing a mild spiritual allergy. Even Séamus avoids passing too close to Alexios, but no one confronts him, because he works, and because his pages are, objectively, beautiful. Haunting, but beautiful. He draws figures you've never seen, symbols you don't understand, but they're perfect. Every line exact, every flourish precise. His script hums, even when silent. One day you peek into the margin of one of his pages. There's a drawing, a single eye, slitted, vertical, surrounded by 7 stars. It looks like it's looking back. You tell no one. But that night, you pull the folded page from beneath your mattress, the one with the celestial diagram and forbidden Greek, and for the first time, it almost makes sense. You sleep poorly, because Alexios may be a monk, he may be a scribe, he may be a man, but he brought something with him, and it's watching the same things you are. Your hands are failing you. It starts small, just a stiffness in the fingers, a hesitation in your grip. You think it's the cold, or maybe yesterday's overzealous scrubbing penance. But the tremor doesn't go away. It lingers, subtle at first, then louder with every day, every hour hunched over vellum. You begin to drop things, your quill, your ink knife, your temper. A single slip ruins a line. One blot, and the entire sheet has to be scraped, re-ruled, and begun again. Brother Séamus watches you now with narrowed eyes, not out of cruelty, but out of concern, which is somehow worse. You try switching hands, your left is clumsy, untrained. The letters look like a confession under duress. You go back to the right. It burns when you flex. At night, it pulses like a heartbeat you didn't ask for. You wrap it in cloth. You pray. You soak it in the cold stream outside, even though you know the abbot forbids bathing after dark. Still, you slip out one night, roll up your sleeve, and submerge your hand in the moonlit current. It doesn't help. You return to your cell, dripping, aching, fingers throbbing. The next morning, your ink looks like it's been written by a drunk goose. Brother Colum, the oldest scribe in the scriptorium, pats your shoulder in passing, says nothing. But later, you find a small tin of rendered goose fat and rosemary oil sitting on your desk. Monastic pain relief. You apply it with hope and quiet desperation. It helps, for an hour. Then the pain returns. Historians still argue whether medieval scribes suffered chronic conditions en masse. Some believe tendinitis, arthritis, and nerve damage were simply part of the job, pain endured in silence. Others believe there were periods of rest, rotational labour, a kind of quiet scribe rotation. But in your monastery, there's only the rule, and the rule demands work, so you keep going. Until one day, your hand locks mid-sentence. You're halfway through Benedictus Dominus Deus Israel, when your knuckles seize. Your fingers claw. The quill falls. You try to flex. Nothing. Just a flare of heat and the sharp panic of not being able to finish the line. You sit there for minutes, eyes on the vellum, heart pounding like war drums. Eventually, Brother Padraig takes your quill and finishes the sentence. He doesn't say a word, just finishes, nods, and moves on. You're quietly reassigned. No announcement, no humiliation. Just a new seat. Further from the windows, closer to the binding desk. You're told to assist. Cutting pages, trimming leather, setting boards for covers. It's honourable work. Necessary. But you know what it means. You've been retired. A quirky moment. As you bind a set of psalms for a visiting bishop, you find a note tucked behind the final folio. In shaky Latin, "My hand failed, but not my will." Signed simply, Frita Dionysius. No date. You trace the letters with your thumb. You think, same boat, different century. Your hand gets worse. The fingers curl at night. You wake up with your fist clenched, nails digging into your palm. You start tying your fingers flat with scraps of linen. Brother Séamus notices. He says nothing. One day, you spill your ink. Not just a drop, a whole bottle. It splashes across a half-bound cover, over your robes, into the pages waiting on your bench. You freeze. You wait for a reprimand, but none comes, because everyone knows this is the beginning of your end as a scribe. And you don't know what you are without ink on your hands. You try to keep contributing. You help sharpen quills. You stir the ink, slowly, carefully, with your left hand now. You hum silently to yourself during tasks, half chant, half spell. You know better than to speak aloud, but your breath still shapes the rhythm. One evening, Brother Alexios passes you a folded page. You open it. Inside, a drawing. A hand, ink-stained, curled, resting on an open book. Above it, a star. Beneath it, one word, rest. You don't look up. You just fold it and tuck it into your robe, over your heart. Later, you walk the cloister with your arm cradled against your chest. The wind brushes your face like a blessing. You stop beneath your favourite window slit, the one that smells of sea air and moss, and watch the light dim on the stones. You will not write many more pages, but you will still read. Still whisper the words to yourself as others copy. Still know that somewhere, beneath the pain, the lines are still there. Et verbum caro factum est. The word became flesh, even in a failing hand. They assign you a new manuscript. Quietly, without fuss. Just a bundle of pages wrapped in oilskin, handed to you by the abbot himself with a single instruction. Finish it. You unwrap it at your desk, your new desk, in the far back corner, where the candles flicker low and no one expects much from you anymore. Your hand, wrapped in linen and salved with rosemary oil, twitches at the ready. The manuscript is strange. No title, no colophon, no list of contents or familiar red rubrics. Just pages, dozens of them. Parchment slightly darker than the rest, as if smoke once tried to claim them. The ink is brown, not quite black, not quite red. It gleams faintly under the candlelight like old blood and copper. You flip to the first full page and stop. The illumination stares back at you. A creature, part lion, part eel, part something unnamed, coiled in a circle, its mouth devouring its own tail. Around it, letters, not Latin, not Greek. Some that resemble runes, others that defy classification altogether. They feel uncomfortable, like something you're not supposed to recognize but almost do. Your fingers twitch. You should report this, but you don't, because something inside you wants to understand, so slowly you begin to copy. You move carefully, your damaged hand cramping by the third line. You use your left for the margin outlines, your right for the lettering. You breathe with every stroke. The text doesn't resist. It pulls. The letters seem to appear before your quill even touches the vellum. You feel more like a vessel than a scribe. The others leave you alone, perhaps because they know you're fading, or perhaps because they sense something strange. Brother Padraig won't meet your eyes anymore. Brother Séamus passes you with barely a glance. And Alexios. He watches, from across the scriptorium, always writing, always silent. But when you look up, he's already turned away. You sleep poorly. Not from pain anymore. That's become part of you. It's the dreams, vivid, fevered. You see pages turning themselves. A book with no spine, its leaves floating in the dark. You see a circle of monks, not chanting, but humming. A sound like insects and wind through stone. In the centre, a candle that doesn't flicker, that burns sideways. You wake drenched in sweat. Your mattress smells like ink and wax and something older. Still, you return to the manuscript, because something in it calls. The illuminations become more disturbing. Angels with 6 eyes and no mouths. Trees made of ribs. A staircase twisting into the sky, filled with symbols that rearrange themselves when you blink. On one page, a monk kneeling before an open book, his hands on fire. You copy it all. Historians debate whether such manuscripts existed at all. Texts without clear origin, without purpose, without theology. Some suggest they were coded messages, or heretical grimoires disguised in holy bindings. Others dismiss them as monastic pranks, the result of too much fasting and too little sleep. You know better. You can feel it, page by page, pressing down on you. One day, you find an unfamiliar phrase repeating itself throughout the manuscript. You begin to see it everywhere, in margins, in decorative initials, even faintly scraped into the vellum as if someone etched it beneath the ink. Per scripturam, transimus. Through writing we pass. You whisper it once aloud. The candle beside you flares, briefly, but unmistakably. You glance around, no one notices, or they pretend not to. Later, during Lauds, you see a flicker in the shadows cast by the high windows. Something long, thin, moving against the light. You close your eyes, a quirky moment. Brother Finton accidentally drops his psalter during compline. It lands open on the floor. The candlelight falls across the page, illuminating a doodle you definitely didn't draw, of a hand holding a quill, writing itself into being. No one acknowledges it, they just keep chanting. You grow quieter, your meals go untouched. Your hand continues to fail, but the words still come, almost like they don't need you anymore. You just show up. And one day you reach the final page. You stare at it. The parchment is blank. You touch it. Your fingertips sting. You dip your quill and begin. The first word comes without thought. So does the second. And the third. You don't know what they mean. You only know they're not yours. They come from somewhere deeper. You finish the final line just as the candle burns out. No wax left. No light. You sit in the dark, breathing the ink. And for the first time you realize, this manuscript is not for reading. It was never for reading. It was for writing you. You don't return to the scriptorium the next day, or the day after. No one asks why. No one needs to. You've faded. Not with scandal, not with ceremony, but quietly, like a smudge on a margin. A name worn thin by time. You eat alone now. Your seat at matins is never quite filled. A shadow seems to occupy it, like the space still remembers the shape you used to be. Your hands barely function. The right curls naturally into a fist, the muscles tight as wet leather. The left shakes when you reach. Writing is impossible now. Even reading has become a burden. Your eyes blur, skipping letters, seeing shapes that don't belong. You rub them. They return. You've taken to walking. Circles around the cloister. Slowly. Each footstep a rhythm, a heartbeat. The path of those who came before you is carved deep into the stone. You simply follow it, a living echo of 1,000 ghosts in brown robes. Sometimes Brother Thomas walks behind you, not beside, just close enough that his sandals slap the flagstones in time with yours. You don't speak. You don't need to. There's a kind of peace in shared motion. Sometimes you visit the alcove, the hidden one, behind the choir loft. The panel still opens for you. The chest is still locked. But you've stopped trying to understand what it holds. Instead, you sit beside it. You breathe. You listen. You've become a watcher now, of shadows, of margins, of the candlelight that stretches down the long hallways like memory. You've become the kind of monk younger scribes glance at and silently wonder about. What happened to him? What did he see? You don't answer. You wouldn't know how to. The manuscript you finished, the nameless one, the one that finished you, is gone. Not shelved. Gone. When you asked, Brother Séamus just looked at you. Not cruelly, not even suspiciously. Just with the slow, careful gaze of a man who's also seen things disappear. You nod. You understand. Sometimes you still hear the quill. In your dreams, in the dark of your cell, the soft scratching, rhythmic and slow. You wake expecting to find ink on your hands. Sometimes you do. A quirky moment. Brother Padrig leaves a loaf of honey bread at your door one morning. He doesn't say anything, but inside, tucked in wax paper, is a small note. You were the best of us. It's not signed. You cry for the first time since the fire. Your days are slower now, but not empty. You teach a few novices how to hold a quill. You correct their letter forms with a gentle finger. You watch them flinch the first time they blot a margin, then smile when they discover the healing power of a careful scrape. You tell them stories, not with words, but in the way your finger traces a shape in the dust, a line, a loop, a little rabbit jousting a snail. They laugh. You nod. There's still life in the margins. One evening, as the wind hammers the outer wall and rain stings the glass like thrown sand, you light a candle. You sit at your desk. The old one. Someone kept it for you. The grooves from your elbows are still there. The wood still smells like wax and ink and effort. You pick up a quill, not to write, but to hold, just to remember the weight of it. The monks chant in the chapel. Their voices rise, fall, coil in the rafters like smoke. You close your eyes, and for a moment, just a moment, You feel it again. The rhythm, the silence, the ink. You have become a page now, and when the wind finally slips through the cracks, it carries your name away like dust from an old folio, lifted gently into a night that has forgotten how to speak. The candle has burned low now. Its light flickers gently across the stone, casting long shadows that curl and stretch like memories caught in sleep. The pages have been turned, the ink has dried, and the scriptorium, once alive with silent breath and unseen glances, grows still. You've walked the cloister so many times that even the floor remembers you. You've copied words older than your bones, drawn creatures stranger than your thoughts, and listened to stars whisper through vellum margins. Now the work is done. There is no need to move, no need to speak. Just rest in the hush of the abbey, where the wind hums a soft psalm and the walls still carry the echo of your quill. The rain outside falls like ink from a trembling hand, slow, steady, cleansing. Somewhere a younger monk sits at your old desk, dipping a quill, not knowing the weight of what he inherits, and that's how it should be. The library goes on, the silence remembers, and your name, though never written, remains in every careful line. Breathe in the last light of the candle, let your hands go still. Let the shadows carry you gently, page by page, into sleep. You've survived the silence. You've survived the ink, and now you rest. 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 You rest.